views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of Paranormal Buzz Radio or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is strictly prohibited. For information on everything Paranormal Buzz Radio has to offer, visit our website, paranormalbuzzradio.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome to Phantom Science, the podcast, where we discuss how to prove it's not just all in your head. Does the paranormal exist? If it does, how does it work? And how do we gather solid indications and data? During this podcast, we will be discussing things that many people may hold near and dear to themselves. If you feel offended at any point, just take a deep breath and think about the thing that offended you. Because we will be playing the role of the recently declawed Office of Devil's Advocate. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And thank you very much for listening.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Phantom Science. The reason this is a special edition is because we were extremely lucky to get an interview with Dr. Marco Mesi. Dr. Mesi is Italian. He attended the German School of Milan and graduated in physics at the University of Padua, which is also a university where Galileo Galilei was a mathematician. He has written a book called Quantum Physics, An Overview of a Weird World, which is an extremely good book if you want to grapple with physics and quantum physics. He doesn't go too over-the-top academic on you with it, but also it's not high school stuff. So I found you can grapple the principles of quantum physics, which is a tough subject, pretty well from this book. Dr. Mesi was extremely kind enough to give us this interview, which for him, he lives in Germany at the moment, was on a Sunday evening, for me Sunday morning. We covered a lot of topics in the interview, basically in three different stages. The first one was the disconnect between mainstream science and the paranormal investigations. And I don't mean ghost hunters and Zach Baggins, I mean proper investigations done by societies, etc. The next major topic we covered was if there are ghosts, how would they work? And is there a way in physics, quantum physics, that we can use a hook to look at what we're looking at? That means, can we develop theories from sound mainstream scientific theories? And the third part of this interview, we discussed us as Joe Average Ghost Hunter. What kind of things can we do? Where should we be going? What should we be looking at? And equipment. So sit back, relax, and I will add a personal note here. This is one of the most satisfying pieces of research I've ever done in the paranormal. So enjoy.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you taking time, especially on a Sunday for us. I tried to contact some of the doctors at the University of Iowa, and I will be honest, a lot of them went, oh, no. It's a tough field for the science and the paranormal coming together is very difficult. I'd like to have your views or what you think that is.
Yeah. The problem is not only ideological, I think, but it is also a question of image, personal image, prestige. And I think that in the academia there are more persons that, the materialistic, strictly materialistic physicalist attitude is still mainstream. I think it's still the majority. But I believe, especially in the recent years, the recent decade, there is a growing movement of people, also among professionals and in the universities, who are becoming increasingly open to this subject, to this topic. However, there is also the problem of your personal prestige, of your personal image. If you are a professor, maybe someone also relatively known professor, famous professor, and you appear on a TV show or on a podcast about ghosts, you are risking your reputation. You understand what I mean? Yeah. I'm not saying that this is a correct attitude, but it is so. If you are in a certain position of, well, not power, but you have maybe constructed your career on a specific image, you must be also careful about your public relations and your image that you radiate.
So, if you have an idea that you want to get across, it's an you are influencing other people to think that way, and they may fix that.
They may be upset. You mean?
Yeah.
I think if you're a materialist, or if you have presented yourself as a materialist, maybe you are not really. I think there are many who, well, it is now. I don't think that it is main concern and main thinking that you have when you work in. I have worked also as a researcher, a postdoc in university for several years, and normally these kind of issues, and you don't talk about it. It's like religion, you know. Well, everyone believes in what they want, and they don't talk about it. But in the background, there is still, it lingers that if you are someone who is open to these ideas, well, no, I don't say that there's no written rule, you know, that they don't fire you. I don't think so. This would be a bit too exaggerated, but you feel it in the atmosphere. Okay. That they begin to judge you. This is the guy, the ghost guy. Ha ha ha.
The Ghostbusters. So.
Yeah, Ghostbusters. Yeah, exactly. Then they will come out with the Ghostbuster thing. Probably. I don't know, but I can imagine this because, personally, I have a very spiritual worldview. I can't say that I'm an expert of. That I should say immediately that I'm not at all an expert on psi phenomenon, paranormal, on all these things. But I personally believe that there is much more than matter, and that there are also good reasons, scientific, rational, and physical reasons to believe that, even though I can't say that actually, at this point, science has shown that. So that's what I always say. We must be able to distinguish between what is speculation, an idea, a belief, and a scientific fact. From the scientific point of view, I think the most correct attitude should be that of being an agnostic. That one is open, but you neither believe nor disbelieve. They say, well, we have no data. We have not sufficient data.
So do you believe that it is a more objective point of view to say it's improbable but possible? Or do you, for example, I got a quote here from Dr. Brian Cox, who does lots of TV shows. Yeah, and he said ghosts don't exist. We found nothing to say they exist, and then he put they do not exist, which I found an extreme statement.
Yeah. Let me. Excuse me.
No rush.
Because I already expected this kind of counter argument, and I don't know if you are aware there was a famous article in the American Psychologist. This is one of the most important peer-reviewed journals of psychology in the US. And finally, in 2019, that is a year ago, or 2018, here's written in 2018, 2019, there was a big debate about an article that the American psychologist let slip through, because usually they don't publish this, about an article that is the experimental evidence for parapsychological phenomena, a review.
Mm-hmm.
May I read you shortly what is written in the abstract, so that
Please
you can
do.
also, yeah. Well, not all the abstract, just some sentences also out of it, so you can understand what it's about. And it says, this article presents a comprehensive integration of current experimental evidence and theories about so-called parapsychological psi-phenomena. It clarifies the domain of psi, summarizes recent theories from physics and psychology that present psi phenomena, I think.
Psi, yeah.
Psi phenomena as at least plausible, and then provides an overview of recent updates, meta-analysis. Meta-analysis means that they have analyzed hundreds of articles that have been published in the last 10, 20, 30, or what I don't know how many years, and they make a comprehensive summary of this meta-analysis. And then they say the evidence provides cumulative support for the reality of psi, which cannot be readily explained away by the quality of the studies, fraud, selective reporting, experimental or analytic incompetence, or other frequent criticism. The evidence for psi is, and that's interesting, by the way, the evidence for psi is comparable to that for established phenomena in psychology and other disciplines. Also, there is no consensual understanding of them. So what they say substantially, that the evidence is already there, and they were able to publish this meta-analysis in a peer-reviewed journal, which means it is not just a journal of paranormal, but a journal that follows scientific criteria. And then what convinced me more of this article was not so much the article in itself, but the reply that came from the other side. From the and already the title says it's all, which so now the counter, the answer from the materialist point of view to that article was searching for the impossible. Psychology's parapsychology's elusive quest. And they say, our position is straightforward. Claims made by parapsychologists cannot be true. Period. The effects reported can have no ontological status. The data have no existential value. And in the classic English, pigs cannot fly. Hence, data that suggest that they can are necessarily flawed and result from weak methodology or improper data analysis, and so on and so on. So substantially, what I mean, the evidence is now growing and it is there, but you just have can see from the answer that they give that they don't even want to look at the evidence, because for them it means that pigs can fly, and since everyone believes that pigs cannot fly, they don't look at the data from the outset.
If I can interject there, two things strike me. One is that's kind of a little bit arrogant.
Yeah.
The reply. And the second one is using pigs can't fly as an example is, I assume that statement came out, I don't know, let's say in the 1700s. We can look that up and research that. That'll happen when pigs fly. Now, if you change your point of view to something that's new, there are airplanes. If you put a pig in an airplane, that pig can fly. So it's just, you see where it depends how you look at it. Can they fly? It's a short statement. Let's extrapolate. So, which leads me actually, because I got a question here, and I'm glad you brought up that it came from psychologists, because there used to be departments of parapsychology in a lot of universities here in America, and they've all closed down, basically. I'm not sure any of them still have a parapsychology. And when you do get parapsychology, it is always attached to psychology. It's a subset of psychology. I guess my question would be, isn't there like a paraphysics equivalent? Why don't physics say, okay, let's look at, which I guess is quantum physics now, if you went back far enough. Is there, to look at phenomena that are reported, and not by a few people, and like the Psychology magazine said, it's very hard to discount every single one of them. So I guess, why wouldn't physicists look into an X factor if, what will we need, if this is really happening? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that physicists could, in fact, contribute to these things greatly, because they have at least the experimental background. They would be able to use a lot of experimental devices and the electronics and the computers and the lasers or whatever. And they have a lot of experience in making experiments that are scientifically sound and so on. But the problem is, again, as I said before, it is a matter of prestige. It is a matter of, you don't get fun. It is also a matter of money. Mm-hmm. You don't get funds for these things, because, and you said they have been closed down, but it's not exactly because of this meta-analysis, as it showed, the evidence there, or at least, if we don't want to speak of evidence, we can speak of strong indications that should eventually encourage to make even more research in the subject. But what happens when you have a department that officially declares that they are doing some research in these fields? I think automatically they are downranked. Also, the ranking of universities is very important in these days. I don't believe it is significant, but unfortunately people consider the university rankings as something objective. They are not, but well, that's another completely different issue. But if you open a department of this type, your ranking goes down. You don't get funds. There will be a lot of people laughing at you, and you will lose your prestige, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the story, they say, well, but why should we do that? We have only to lose and nothing to gain from it.
Yep. Do you think it's true that, so I've got on my notes here, so the funding, really, a lot of universities will look at something material, develop something, and have a saleable product at the end of it that they can sell a patent or an idea and have further developed. But in more of a philosophical issue, if you get a result, it's not really sellable. So there's not money to be made in that. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, well, this is a factor which comes on the top of all of it. Yes, I think there is a much too pragmatic and much too utilitaristic approach in our scientific thinking nowadays. And I think we already are seeing this, that the universities, the science is slowly but steadily becoming more interested also in philosophical issues, but it will take some time again. So also this aspect is there, I agree, but only to a certain point, because think of other subjects like astronomy, for example, or particle physics. They have spent billions to build the Large Hadron Collider, and which, by the way, didn't produce much results in these years, unfortunately. And even if it produces results, it is in the field of theoretical physics. There are also some departments which use these machines also for research in medicine and so on. But it is mainly dedicated to theoretical physics, which does not immediately, or at least not predictable, give predictable pragmatic results that you can employ to make money. So this is only partially true, I think, because there are also other researchers that are financed nevertheless, even if you don't expect results at the financial, commercial level.
And then I guess my last question here, once again, I think it's an opinion question, but, the last question on, about the mainstream science paranormal. Whatever happened to natural philosophers? It's kind of, you don't find them as much, or I'm looking in the wrong place, or they're called something else now. I don't know, but people that just sit and think about things and try and, scientific things, like thinking about the nature of light. Did they all become mathematicians and physicists, or?
Well, yes, in part it is so, but I don't know, if, let me see here, there was something I wouldn't, I don't know if there are no natural philosophers. The problem is, yes, that there is always this approach that we have already in schools. It is all about knowledge, that we have to learn concepts and to apply them to something that is physically sensible and not to a thought process. We should not question the meaning of things. We should not question the why and the what of things, but only the how. Or the other way around, perhaps. We should only question how things work, not what things are.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that is deeply engraved also in the scientific community, especially after the quantum physics revolution, because if you get entrenched in the philosophical aspects, you might not proceed really. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you shut up and calculate, as they say, they used to say, shut up and calculate, you take this approach, and then you get a lot of results. And in fact, we have the standard model of particle physics nowadays, which is the product of this attitude, of this scientific attitude, which created a wonderful, enormous theory that to a great extent has been also proven to be perfectly correct. But we ended up in a sort of Platonic universe where we are in a total abstraction full of calculations, numbers, and abstract concepts. But when it comes to the why and what is that, well, then the physicist says, okay, but what is matter? Take matter, for example. What is matter? Well, yeah, matter, it's molecules and atoms. Well, you are only shifting reality is a problem, because you imagine hard stuff, rigid marbles, like billiard balls, and you are only shrinking them in the dimension, in the size. But you again have only these marbles. So what are these atoms? Atoms are made of electrons and the nuclei. Okay, but again you have this idea of a chunk of matter, which is again, if you look in quantum mechanics, there is no longer this idea. Has been washed away in a certain sense, and so on. This goes up infinitum. Then if you press the physicist and say, well, what is matter deep down, the thing in itself, as Kant would have said? They say, okay, but we are so annoying. This is something for philosophers, not for scientists. Yep. So on one side, they believe to know things, how things are truly. And when they are pressed to think about it, they realize that they don't know, but then they say, okay, but I'm not a philosopher, I'm a physicist, and I'm not interested in this stuff. However, having said that, I believe that there is a growing movement that is evaluating the role of philosophy. You can see this nowadays, especially in theoretical physics. There are also famous physicists who endorse this idea that we should find again this philosophical dimension, at least in physics or in theoretical physics, because we have lost ourselves in math. There's also Sabine Hossefelder. She is quite famous. She is a physicist, but she has written a lot of books also about this. And there's one book which says that physics is lost in math, which means we have lost this philosophical dimension because we realize that science describes the how, but not the what. Huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm optimistic. I think in the next years this will slowly but steadily will come up again. Materialism, I would say, is increasingly losing its grip on the mind of peoples.
And that leads us into I'd like to move on to physical properties of, so basically, spirituality, religions, etc. They all deal with really the continuation of humans outside of biomechanical bodies. So really, we have to think of a way that our consciousness can survive outside of a material construct. Now, do you believe there is a mechanism that could be applied to that? Or do you think, once the electronic signals between the brain cells, once the cells are gone, there's nowhere to go, and that's it, we just cease to exist? I mean, is there a mechanic that could be applied, do you think, or do you think we still need to look for something like that?
Yeah. Just pointing at the good old mind-body problem that dates back to the times of Descartes. He said, well, one thing is our brain, another thing is our mind or consciousness. I don't believe mind and consciousness are the two things, the two same things. But anyhow, that's a detail. But he said, well, our mind is the idea of the dualist who believes that mind and body are two distinct things, whereas the materialist says your mind, your consciousness, everything is produced by the cells and the 186 billion neurons in your brain, and that's it. But in the modern philosophy of mind, this has come up again. There was also the famous philosopher David Chalmers, I don't know how to pronounce him. And in any case, he came up with the so-called hard problem of consciousness. He said, well, okay, if the brain, if our consciousness is just the product of what the brain, the function of the brain and nothing more, how is it possible that these biochemical reactions in our brain lead to the experience of so-called phenomenal consciousness? How can we see, how does it transform in the perception, subjective perception of qualities like pain, pleasure, seeing colors, and things like that, which seems not to, and there is a growing movement also in the philosophy of mind, I think, that is opening to ideas that accept that probably consciousness, or not all our conscious life, is not only created by the brain. Probably the brain has some role, of course, but that it cannot be reduced only to that. And there is a growing movement in this sense. The panpsychists now are quite have returned into fashion after, I think, a couple of centuries. Now they have returned into fashion in some sense, because the utter failure of the physicalist science to explain the problem of consciousness is becoming more and more evident. And I think this is quite clear.
But do we have a mechanic where a consciousness could exist outside of? I'm not proceeding to say yes, there is one. If there isn't one, there isn't one. But if you were looking for that mechanic, roughly, what direction would we go to look? Is the question.
Well, I don't think this is in contradiction with a physical series that we have today. One thing is when a theory or a science does not find something, does not know something, but this doesn't mean that if this something exists, that it would be in contradiction with the science. If there is something of our consciousness that goes beyond matter, I don't think this would be in contradiction with physics, because, for example, I can only laugh at those people who say I believe only in matter. Well, then, if you believe only in matter, you are against the status of physics, of normal science, of all the physical theories that we have, and you are against the evidence, because already nowadays in physics there are a lot of things that are not material. Think of the simple, good old daily experience of light. Mm-hmm. Light is also in physics is considered something. The photon, this elementary quanta of light, is not considered a particle with a mass. It has zero mass. There are also other particles which have zero mass, especially the force mediators. We know that there are other things that are not materials. Think of, for example, of magnetic field, electric field, electromagnetic fields, the gravitational waves that have discovered recently, which, there is now a contention going on. Some people say that perhaps we didn't get it right, but that's another thing. But it is accepted that there are non-material things or think also, for example, of dark matter. Now, we know that there is this dark matter and nobody knows what it is. We even don't know if it is really matter or perhaps it's something else that some say that it is a modification of the Newtonian laws. Or take also for a gravitational field. The gravitational field that attracts the moon into the orbit around the Earth, there's nothing in between. What is it? This is an old problem that also Newton had to deal with, where he said, well, I don't know, I don't make hypotheses on this. So there are already a lot of things that are not material in the conventional orthodox accepted physics. So I don't think there is nothing that indicates that if there is some subtle form of matter, I prefer to call it subtle matter instead of ghost matter, but we could call it whatever you wish. If there's some subtle form of matter, it may be well fit in our present theories. Okay. Yeah.
So there may be mechanics there. It's not anti-physics to okay, excellent. Hang on a moment. So I'm going to segue into my next question, because we talked about gravity, and I don't know if this is still a standing theory, but the idea was put forward that gravity is not a strong force because I think was it the brain theory? Because it travels through dimensions before it actually gets to us, and therefore weakens the effect of gravity. Is that still talked about, or has it been debunked? Or
not really debunked, but there have been experiments which try to see if it is a strong force that is mediated through higher dimensions from a sort of top-down influence into our three-dimensional world. I don't know now the details, but I read that it was a theory that predicted that then we must see some anomalies that can be measured in the laboratory, and that they didn't measure. So
But
it has not been debunked, but until to a certain degree of precision of our measuring apparatus, it's not confirmed, and it's probably I'm skeptic, I must say.
And yeah, but that leads. I guess the reason I pulled that is it leads to, the possibility or probability of multiple dimensions, because a lot of people in the paranormal field believe that, some things they see or have been reported may be from other dimensions coming through. It's a narrative, and just the possibilities now of other dimensions. I mean, I think string theory keeps adding to, maybe not as we've got in our mind what we think other dimensions are, but there are, that science is willing to say there are other dimensions. Is that wrong? Is that
you're perfectly right. Not only one of the big mysteries, why are we living in a three-dimensional universe? Well, our universe is probably four-dimensional, curved, and so there's this model, this idea, cosmological model of universe, three-dimensional universe curved in a fourth dimension, and so on. But the question is, why are there three? Why don't we live in a 4, 5, 7, 127th dimension or whatever? So far, there is no compelling theory or insight or discovery or something that tells us that there can be only three and nothing else as dimensions. And as you mentioned, there is also string theory that conceives of 10 plus 1 dimensions, in whole 10 spatial dimensions and one temporal dimension. And so the idea that there can be also extra dimensions is perfectly compatible with the physical laws that we know nowadays. This is one thing. However, so far, string theory has not been confirmed. Quite the contrary, the last experiments of the LHC seem to indicate that it is probably not a correct theory, or they at least did not discover the things that the theory predicted at low energies. And so probably the string theory as such is probably not a correct theory or description of the universe. But the idea of multiple dimensions.
Is there another theory that's come forward to replace what string theory was trying to describe?
Yeah, there are a lot of so-called quantum gravity theories, but at this stage, and that's a problem also. This is the crisis of at least a sector of theoretical physics, where people from the times of Einstein for 50 years, almost half a century, have tried to find for so-called quantum gravity. That is a gravity that expands our knowledge from quantum mechanics to relativity and puts them into a same grand unified theory. And grand unified theories are another. Forget about grand unified theories. It's something else. But they so-called theory of everything. Yeah? But so far we were not able. And some people, as I do also, conjecture that this is also because we have detached ourselves from this philosophical interest in questioning, and we have made all the calculations, lost our contact with the philosophical dimension of research, and that's the result. We have a gigantic mathematical construct, but which has, so far it seems, has nothing to do with reality. Yeah?
When you do an exam and you forget the question because you're halfway through the
yeah, a good point. Yes, this is a good analogy. Yes, I would say that's something similar. And we are now, I think we will come to the point where we'll realize that we have forgot ourselves. Huh? Mm-hmm. In the sense that we are always externalized towards the material external world, and don't realize what is happening inside of us. And a lot of research is in a sort of stagnation, I think, also because of this. Perhaps not only because of this, but also because of this attitude.
It could be a part of it. Okay. I'd like, because of time, I could talk to you all day, but
yeah, I have time. Now it's Sunday, so I have no problem. You can also extend a little bit if you wish.
So I don't know if you're aware, in America there is it's kind of a hobby. People go to places that are supposed to be haunted, and then they pull out EMF meters and all kinds of things like that, and try and find. They call it evidence. I don't call it evidence, but that's the terminology they use. So I guess, and this is coming from me. I try and look at things objectively. I try and educate myself, and then a lot of them go there and they narrate. They tell stories. It's kind of like folklore, but modern folklore. To me, that's what it seems to be. And many people believe it. I'm not attacking their belief, but if they're going to actually truly investigate and see what's going on in some way, I think they have to try and link it to some way, some kind of mechanic or physics. So it's kind of like we described earlier, where science is moved away from philosophy. To me, the ghost hunters are too far in the philosophy and the stories, and not enough in the. So, as much as science should move across to the abstract or the philosophy side, I think that ghost hunting, as it's called here in America, should move a little bit closer to the science side instead of just telling stories and stuff. So I guess with that as a background, there's a couple of questions I'd like to ask you. If people are going to do this, even, we're amateurs, just people, what are some of the best practices that we can try and employ to try and at least get a handle on if a place is haunted and we wanted to find out what's going on there? What do you think some practices that should be employed to try and get something that's...
Yeah, but is the question procedural or technical? I mean,
either. Whatever you think is important. I mean, start from the beginning.
Because I think it's not sufficient to have the equipment. It is also necessary to have the right attitude with which you use this equipment and with which you interpret the data of the equipment. Let's begin with the attitude, perhaps. I think the most important thing is to have a sort of, intellectual integrity, a sort of intellectual humility, the soberness. Yeah? That is, we must know our limits. And we must be able to know what we don't know. Because they are, and don't say this only to those who are working the paranormal. I would also say the same thing to scientists, because there are always ideological, there's always in the background, even if we are not aware of that, an ideological bias. And therefore, it is good to accept a sort of healthy skeptical attitude. Healthy skeptical, the word skeptical nowadays has taken a negative connotation, especially among the...
I know.
yeah. But there is also the healthy aspect of the skeptical, and it makes part of science that you don't fool yourself, jumping to conclusions. And there is also an interesting article. Maybe I can later send you a link of an article of Nature which came out, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. And Nature is one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. And where they said, dear scientists, there is too much evidence that your research is biased. You are influenced by your ideological background. now we give you a list of all the things, how to make a decent, non-biased research. And it's extremely interesting. I found there was a list and what the right attitude is of the correct, the skeptical in the positive sense. But it was extremely interesting and a very, very necessary, something that is really necessary today, because there's so much research going out there and everyone gets what they want to get. That cannot be. Cannot be.
Yep.
Yeah. So, So this is about always be open to accept the eventuality that you may have gotten it all wrong, so to speak. Yeah. If you have this inner attitude, in a positive sense, that you say, okay, I hope that this comes out, but I don't want to fool myself. So from the practical point of view, from the technical point of view, I was thinking about that when I got your invitation, and I think, how can we possibly detect the existence of some sort of how do you say subtle matter? I was thinking the best parallel would be, the best analogy in modern science would be, for example, the research of neutrinos. In fact, they are called also ghost particles. So, and there you see that this is not only the neutrino detection, but everywhere, or not all, everywhere, but almost everywhere in physics nowadays, that you don't just take the data, the raw data, and then look at it and you see if there's a result or not. You have, first of all, to make all a filtering out from the data. The noise must be filtered out, the spurious effects. You must filter out the things that have nothing to do with what you are looking for, and the data must be processed. Yeah? Mm-hmm. What I saw, I mean, I'm not, again, I say I'm not an expert of ghost hunting, but the few that I saw, what I see, that there are people who, I don't say you because I didn't see what you did, but I mean, really, but
yeah, honest, that's what
no, really, for. I don't know, but in almost all, I saw that they take maybe a signal and then just look at it. This signal must be filtered out. You must filter out the noise, and you must filter out what makes part of the material world that you know. If you take an image, for example, I would say, for example, in the far infrared, so you know the thermal imaging. In the far infrared, take an image or make a movie also, but subtract from this image all the noise which is due to the device. You know the CCD camera always have noise, and you have to subtract that, and also subtract the material world that you know exists. There's a chair, and you subtract the image of the chair. There's a table, you subtract the image of the table, and so on. And then see if something is left.
Yep. Yeah.
You understand? So
yeah,
this is an attitude that you have nowadays there's nothing, also in particle physics, it's all about subtracting and processing images or raw data. And that I think it's absolutely necessary also in this field. Only then, if there is in the background some very low-level feeble signal, only then you can see it. Otherwise, it is lost in the noise and in the background material world, and you can't see it. And this came to my mind because of the neutrinos. I said because the neutrinos, they have giant laboratories under a mountain. Why do they put that under a mountain? Because the mountain shields all the cosmic rays that come from the universe, and the devices, measurement apparatus, these giant devices that they have under the mountain can be left only with signals from neutrinos, because the neutrinos are not filtered by the mountain.
Which brings me, I mean, that's a point I've been trying. I've been trying to explain a lot of equipment that people that go hunting ghosts use is built for ghost hunting, and I don't understand how it can be built for ghost hunting. And when you look at a lot of it, it's programmed in to give false positives because, for example, one thing they use is a K2 meter, which is basically a very rudimentary EMF detector. And then when I looked at one, it's not shielded, so everything's setting off. But people enjoy that, so that's good advice. Is filter out. There's no filter for radio, for example. So you see, but it makes money.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Are there other devices that made extra for ghost hunting?
There's some, and that was my next point. Is okay. So when people go ghost hunting, I believe, and I'd like your opinion on this, is to have at least some theory going in instead of just observing and forming a theory. As you said, they have an agenda in their head, so they'll see something they think is, that's unusual, and then because they're looking for ghosts, then therefore it must be a ghost. Isn't it? Don't you think to have some kind of theory before you go in? For example, if there's a report that certain things happen, look for that specifically, and if it happens, measure pretty much everything you can when it does happen, so you can try and. Is that? Would you agree that it's more important to have a theory first, or observe and then form a theory?
Oh, I don't think that there are rules in this sense. If you look at the history of science, things have been discovered by having a theory first, but also the other way around was equally true. Things have been discovered also maybe just by coincidence. If you look at the things like dark matter or dark energy, these things, they have been discovered because nobody knew that they even could exist. Quite the contrary, they contradict our physical knowledge. So, however, there are also counterexamples where, for example, take Newton. Newton developed all his theory, and with his theory, he could explain what we observe in the sky, the movement of the planets, and later also a new planet, Neptune, was discovered just by making the calculations on the base of Newton's law of gravitation. I mean, so it's not necessary to stick to one or the other thing. I think having a good theory is a good thing, but here again, be open to the possibility that the theory may be totally wrong. And that may happen after hard work, or maybe sometimes it happens after a whole career where people, and that's the so-called nightmare scenario where physics is finding itself nowadays. We had for decades people working on string theory, and well, it's the last word has not still been said, but there are a lot of indications that it seems that it was for nothing, or at least that theory does not describe the physical world. And so generations of physicists have worked on something, and now they stick at that. Here you see the same effect, the same thing. They don't want to give up the thing because they don't want to admit that perhaps they got it wrong. So there's a lot of human psychology going on here, also in the scientific area.
But would you not agree that a negative is also a result? I mean, it's a point of data.
Great point. Very good point. And I always say it is also a good thing to publish articles, which I had personally this problem, where when I was in research, I made some research, and no real the theory was not confirmed. The experiment disconfirmed the theory, and it was not published because they told me that publishing a non-result is not useful. Whereas quite the contrary is true, because then if others don't know about it, they repeat again the experiment for nothing, despite the fact that. So you see,
we
it's
can
not.
use the process of deduction. Okay, we look at something that's not true, put it aside, move on to the next thing. So I think negatives are useful personally.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. But people should know it. If people don't know it, they make again the same mistake, which is not a mistake, but.
But I find the problem with that when you are working in an area where a lot of it is a strong belief. For example, your example of string theory, people that have been working on string theory, when you say, I'm sorry, that's been found to be not true, they take it personally.
Yeah.
And they get upset. So I don't know if that happens in physics a lot. But
if you search for the blog of Peter Voigt, which means not even wrong. Not even wrong is a mathematician. Peter Voigt is a mathematician who, since a lot of years now, is an anti-string theory guy. He received a lot of personal attacks also because of that. Mm-hmm. But time seems to show that he was right. Huh? So but there's a lot of politics and emotions going on also in the scientific environment. Don't believe that. Don't believe the contrary. Also, physicists are human.
Yep. A lot of psychology going on. So you got to. These are, we're just normal people with normal budgets. Can you think of any equipment that is useful, like detectors that how do I word this? That can detect, that will give useful information in a place where something is happening. Obviously we use EMF detectors, for example, because there is a lot of people believe there is a correlation between electromagnetic field and ghosts, for example, which would explain some things that happen. But
that might be okay. Didn't think about that.
No, that's
fine. Maybe that there is some sort of electric or magnetic anomalies in the environment. Perhaps now here is a philosopher who speculates wildly. Yeah? That's nice. Why not? That if there is some sort of ghost, and if these ghosts have some sort of bodies like ours or something similar, and if this ghost is now in this, are listening to our podcast now, and you have a ghost sitting near you, and I have a ghost here sitting me, that maybe here in this place here, there's a little electric divergence. Huh? Mm-hmm. I never thought about that, but if that is true, then it must be very, very little. Mm-hmm. Because I think we have nowadays already a lot of measurement devices which would have detected these anomalies if these anomalies would be strong. Mm-hmm. But one can also speculate that these anomalies are very, very little. Yeah? And then we come back to the point that I said before. If they are very little, they are probably drawn into the background noise. Mm-hmm. So you have first to make a measurement of all the electromagnetic or electromagnetic environment, and then subtract it from the background noise. Maybe that something may turn out. But I had another idea. I thought about in the far, as already mentioned, because if there is an organism that has some sort of metabolism, I don't know how these ghosts are made, but
nobody does.
Nobody does. But I just let it see perhaps from a bit an anthropomorphic point of view, but we cannot avoid that. they have probably also some organism that is producing some sort of metabolism. All metabolic organism produces some form of energy. There's energy input and output. And this means also a temperature gradient. I can imagine that if these organisms exist, they might produce some thermal divergence at gradient, a thermal gradient in the environment, which is probably very, very extremely weak, but in principle could be detected by far infrared thermal imaging. But this must be so here we come to the budget problem. Probably I don't know. It might not be in the budget interval that you have, but it should be thermal far infrared CCD camera, which has a high resolution, not in the image, but in the thermal resolution. So it can detect also the gradient of 100 degrees of temperature, and that has as few as possible noise. It should have, all CCDs have always noise, but it should be optimized in temperature resolution and noise reduction. And then take the image, subtract the noise, subtract the objects, the material objects that you see, and maybe that's just wild speculation. So I'm not saying
many ghost hunters do use those thermal images. I mean, I have one, except they are very low resolution just because of the cost, of these things. So basically, I think most ghost hunters have a detector for pretty much everything, temperature changes, electromagnetic fields, everything, because it doesn't matter what the ghost is made of, in my mind, for it to have something that we notice to make that report of, I've seen a ghost or this happens, they do have to materialize in some form to interact with our material world, correct? So I guess that's what we're looking for, is the material interaction, how's that working, I think. But it sounds to me like we need better equipment that's a lot better attuned than what we use, I think.
Yeah, a better equipment, and probably also a better data analysis. Because it's not sufficient. For example, take the Hubble Space Telescope. The Hubble Space gives these wonderful images of the galaxies. Don't believe a moment that the image that you see is the same image that you get from the telescope, from the raw image, the raw data. It's not like that. They have first to, they have to subtract all the noise, and then they have a problem more, because in the space, the CCD cameras are hit by cosmic rays, and which you have a lot of blobs in your image, and these must be processed away. And then the final image must be again processed, because you want to have more contrast, for put the colors and this and that. Only at the end of a long and sometimes also very complicated data analysis and image processing, you have the final image. But so it's not only about the instruments, it's also about how then you process the data. And I think this is very important. But maybe a general consideration, physical consideration. If this subtle world exists, it can, this is also the old interaction problem of the philosophy of mind. The problem is not only if there is a mind and the body, but if they are disjunct. But if really this mind exists and is not material, how can it interact with something that is material? So you get but I don't think this is a real problem in modern physics. you have these four fundamental forces: electromagnetism, gravity, and two nuclear forces. And there is no reason to believe that there is also a fifth or sixth or seventh force. By the way, in the last month, there was someone who is claiming who has found eventually a fifth force, but this is still not. It's have been still not published. It is not confirmed. But in principle, there is this possibility that there are also other forces which interact with, which are force mediators between our matter and the subtle matter.
Mm-hmm.
But light does not interact with it, and the normal matter does not interact with it with known forces, but it might interact with it through other type of forces that we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is the case, then it is quite possible that there is an energy transfer, so to speak, from one subtle world to the hard world where we live, so to speak. And this energy transfer probably is only very weak, but it is eventually detectable in form. And that's why I said far infrared, because I suspect it is in the it is at the level of heat transfer. When you transfer heat, you see it better in the infrared, far infrared spectrum than in ultraviolet. But okay, that's of course also a speculation. So I think it is possible, but as far as I know, these devices cost tens of thousands of dollars.
You can't build one with an Arduino chip and a couple of sensors.
Yeah, no, Arduino chip would be probably not sufficient. Well, but with Arduino you can do a lot of things. In any case, it's also very nice. Yeah. You should get funds from a university or something like that.
They'll drop in the rankings. They're not going to do it.
Yeah. I suspect it.
So, I'm going to slowly wrap this up, if that's okay with you. Like I said, I could talk with you all day.
Okay.
I'm afraid I've still got to go to work here today and earn my funds. Can you let everybody know the name of your book?
Quantum Physics, an overview of a weird world.
Okay.
And the Udemy course is the same, but the Udemy course is only reduct. So I would suggest the book is better there. In 3 weeks, there's also the new version. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. And then the next book will be about these kind of stuff. Not about ghosts, but about the connections between sciences, consciousness, reality, the meaning, the search for meaning, and finally also spirituality and mind, matter things, and things like that.
Excellent. I will be first in line to buy that one.
Thank you. But it will take still some time. I think I'm just at the beginning with that book.
That's fine. Just let me know when it comes out. So,
okay. Sure.
So that was the interview. I hope you enjoyed it at least half as much as I did. Now, go out and grab his book. Educate yourself a little bit on some physics, some quantum physics, and I swear it will help you when you're ghost hunting, thinking about how can this be, how does this work, as I hope you're doing. And thank you very much for listening. We appreciate it.